Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is religious leadership, black religious leadership in the age of Trumpism. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about black religious leadership in the age of Trumpism, Dr. LBaldwin. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you so much.
I think I say it each time, Dr. Baldwin, that we don't have to introduce you to this audience because, you know, you've been here, Dr. Baldwin. I mean, we have really been here together on many, many occasions.
Oh,
It goes way back, almost unseemly.
Exactly.
So, but certainly you make such a great contribution to what we do here that we're just glad to have you every time you come, and especially to think in terms of the topics that you would like to deal with. And so what we'd like to do for members of our audience who might not know you, give them an opportunity to hear about your background, your education, and some of your experiences during this first 6 minutes. And then when we come back, we'll have an opportunity to start with religious leadership in the age of Trumpism. You see, especially African-American leadership more than anything else. So let's start off by having you to talk about Dr. LBaldwin, your background, your education, and some of your experiences.
Well, I'm a native of Camden, Alabama, the so-called Black Belt, Wilcox County, Alabama. Born there in the late 40s, educated at Camden Academy High School, junior high, elementary school, all of which was segregated. So I was born in Wilcox County, Alabama, educated there. Once I finished high school in 1967, I matriculated at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, which, as you well know, is a historically black institution. From there to Crozer Theological Seminary. I was there at Crozer from 1971 to 75, receiving both the M.A. in Black Church Studies and the M.Div. in Theology, and from Crozer Theological Seminary to Northwestern University, where I received the Ph.D. in 1980 in American Christianity. And from that point, of course, I've taught at a number of institutions, Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York, Vanderbilt University here in Nashville, also taught courses at American Baptist College and Fisk University. But for 30 years, I was a professor of religious studies at Vanderbilt University here in Nashville.
And so you've been around, Dr. Baldwin, and the topic that we're going to deal with this morning is religion. And you're well grounded in this particular area. As a matter of fact, to give our audience some idea of how grounded you are dealing with the African experience and Dr. Martin Luther King and civil rights and social rights, you generally bring a book, a newly written book with you every time, and I know that because you know I have a number of them and I didn't buy them. You know, I think they came from you, and so you generally bring a book by. But tell our audience some of the books that I have on my shelf, written by Louis V. Baldwin, and that would give them some idea in terms of what they can expect from us when we talk about religion in the age of Trumpism this morning.
Well, I've written a lot on Martin Luther King Jr. and his style of leadership, his understanding of leadership, and how his understanding of leadership was rooted in African American culture and his understanding of African American history. Dr. King was an ethical leader. He was a moral leader. He was a prophetic leader. And of course, I think that relates very much to what we need today, because we are facing many challenges in our country today. So my books are really about the ethical leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. And how he tried to bring America back to what he called those deep well springs of democracy, which were dug deep in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So that's what I've been writing about for the last 35 years.
Now, how many books have you published, Dr. Baldwin?
Well, I've written, I guess, about 15 books. 12 of those books are on Martin Luther King Jr. I've written 6, I've co-edited 2, I've edited 2, and I've co-authored 2 for a total of 12 books on Martin Luther King Jr.
Is there anything about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that you've not written about? Now think about that, because it's easy to say what you have done in reference to Martin Luther King, but when we come back during this second segment, I want you to make some statements in reference to that before we get into this other segment. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
You got to acknowledge him first.
Okay, and so what we'll do as soon as we come back and we'll introduce the second segment, I'll say, that we come back and you somehow bring up that first topic, the first...
Ethical leadership.
Yeah, ethical leadership.
What we are in dire need of today.
Very good. Okay, and and then we'll start off. We'll deal with that for 8 minutes, and then we'll...
Why there's a need.
Yeah, where there's a need, and then we'll have that break, and then we'll come back with that 10-minute segment and wrap up everything else. You know what you have on this list, but I know, I've got some idea, but I probably have the third part, the first part, and et cetera, and knock us all out of order in a real sense.
No problem. You've done a great job.
But we'll do that as soon as we come back. Okay, yeah. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. LBaldwin, and he's giving us some information in reference to African-American leadership, church leadership during the age of Trumpism, as it is called. Let's talk about that, Dr. Baldwin. First, explain to us what we mean when we say the age of Trumpism.
We're talking about an age in which there's a lot of divisiveness in the country. We are a fragmented nation along the lines of race and class and gender, religion, sexual orientation. We're probably at a point where we are more divided than any other time in the 20th century, except, of course, for the first half of the 20th century. So there's a need for ethical leadership to help us meet this crisis of fragmentation, as I call it, the crisis of division that exists between Americans, also along political lines. Now, we don't look to political leaders to heal that kind of division, because they are usually what? They are agents of polarization.
Politicians.
They are agents of polarization. We don't look to athletes and entertainers. We look to religious leaders who are the moral leaders of society, who are the moral guardians of society. And I think that speaks this age of Trumpism, in this time of fragmentation and division, and this time of searching for peace and for economic justice and universal health care. I think we need ethical leaders. And of course, I can speak to you about how leadership unfolds in this day and time. Of course, you have leaders who are very much in support of Trumpism, and of course, Trumpism is also about a standard of behavior. It's about how one responds to democratic norms and traditions and institutions and values. It's about how we become a more civil society. It's about the normalization of bigotry and intolerance. I think of all of this when I think of Trumpism, and I think that we need ethical voices, religious voices, to become prophetic voices. That is, speaking out against the evils that exist in our society, not only matters of personal evil, but matters of social evil. And when I speak of social evil, of course, I mean white supremacy, racism, I mean religious bigotry and intolerance, I mean poverty and economic injustice, and I mean war, violence, and human destruction. So there's a need today, I think, for leaders who are profiles in courage, who are prophetic leaders in the tradition of the Old Testament prophets, to speak out against the social evils that afflict our society.
Well, Dr. Baldwin, where did this idea of Trumpism come in? I mean, how did that originate, and where did it come from?
Well, Trumpism to me is not only a way of thinking, it's a way of behavior. And if you look at what has happened since the 2016 election, we've become a more divided nation. We've become, in many ways, an uncivil nation. If you study the statistics, bullying in schools have gone up. Road rage incidents have gone up. The targeting of people of color, black and brown people, by police, the criminal justice system, statistics on that have gone up. So what we are talking about is a society in crisis, a society that needs healing. And when I speak of healing, I'm talking not only about the fragmentation that exists between people along the lines of race and class and religion, etc. I'm talking about the kind of healing that makes us more devoted to the embodiment of those values and those principles that make America America. And here I'm talking about Christian values and principles. I'm talking about democratic values, the values of participatory democracy. We need to go back to those kinds of values. So making America great again is not about going back to what appealed to the worst in us, but it's about going back to that which appeals to the best in us.
And so what you're saying is that if we're talking about, excuse me, making America great again, you're talking about a period when America was great, and it has not been explained about what America being great really meant.
Well, there's also always been a certain greatness about America, but we also have to look at the other side, which of course does not speak to greatness, but speaks to the weaknesses and the limitations of what we've been about. We've been a great nation in many ways, but if we're going to be the moral leader of the world, continue to be the nation that provides moral leadership of the world, then we have to deal with these problems of racial divisiveness. We have to deal with the problems of sexism and patriarchy. We have to deal with the problems of homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. All of these problems that divide us, we must overcome in order to achieve the greatness that we are capable of achieving. And
I would imagine naturally the church or the synagogue or whatever would be the leader in such movements.
Exactly. Leadership must come from the church. And I mean not only the black church, but the white church. Leadership must come from the Jewish community, from those minority traditions which are growing in this country, Buddhism, Hinduism, leaders, Islam. We need leaders of all religious traditions, all faith traditions, to get involved in what I call prophetic leadership. We hear a lot today about prosperity gospel, about the kind of gospel that provides material prosperity for us, but we need to deal with these issues of social justice, of economic and political justice. And that's where leadership is needed today.
And you find that there's a lack of leadership, especially among the churches and church leaders. Is that what we're saying?
Exactly. What I'm saying is that there's an erosion of prophetic leadership. You know that during the age of Martin Luther King Jr., there were prophetic leaders, leaders who spoke out against racial injustice, economic exploitation.
Okay, so we're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. I think we disconnected that.
Yes, sir. Hope it's going all right, Doc.
I think you tripped something there on the floor. Yeah, check your plug back there on the back. Yeah, we lost the sound somewhere. There's no problem? Okay. Now, this is the second segment coming up here.
Okay, got a last one, okay.
And this is the last segment? Okay, very good.
Yeah, I can talk about where leaders line up in terms of their
Okay.
support or lack of support for Trumpism.
Okay, very good. Okay, that's good. So we've moved into the third segment of this. Well, this is really good. This is our 10-minute segment here. Okay, and I've got one show after this, and then that'll be it. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. LBaldwin, and he's given us some information in reference to religious leadership in the age of Trumpism. And Dr. Baldwin, you've already given us a very, very good definition of what you call Trumpism. And so let's give you an opportunity during the last 10 minutes to sort of expand and expound upon some of the things that you believe that our audience ought to know and how we might, in a real sense, become a better country than we are today.
Yes, when I think of clergy or religious leadership and its responses to the challenges of Trumpism, several things come to mind. First of all, you have those religious leaders in our society, like Jerry Falwell Jr., like Paula White, like Kenneth Copeland and others who are supporters of the agenda of Trumpism because primarily it is anti-abortion and also because it promotes this idea of religious freedom. And religious freedom too often means not having to bake cakes for same-sex couples. So religious freedom is taking on a different definition. So you have those who are supporters of Trumpism. You also have supporters in the black church, like Mark Burns in South Carolina, Darrell Scott in Ohio. These are black pastors who have aligned themselves with what I call Trumpism. They are, in effect, chaplains to imperial power. And then, on the other hand, you have those who are complacent and silent, primarily in our mega churches and super mega churches. Mega church preachers like Creflo Dollar, super mega church preachers like T.D. Jakes and Joel Osteen. That type of leadership, I think, is very silent in this age of Trumpism. They're not raising issues about economic justice. They're not raising issues about universal health care. They're not raising issues about the negative effects of white supremacy on our society. And then you have that level of leadership in the black and white community that has been primarily co-opted and marginalized. You see, they are not prophetic leaders. So what we need, I think, in this period in the 21st century is prophetic leadership. We need religious leaders who are not only prophetic, but who are profiles in courage. And that's what we're missing. I think ministers in our churches are addressing issues of personal salvation. They're concerned very much about matters of personal ethics, but they are not concerned about the issues that prophetic leaders have traditionally been concerned about. And that is, you got to deal with the issues of equal rights. You got to deal with the issue of social injustice. And I can think of one minister in our society today who I think represents that, and of course that's Reverend William Barber from North Carolina. You may know that name. He's been heavily involved with the NAACP in North Carolina. He's the leader of now what is called the Moral Mondays movement. They meet on Mondays, and every Monday someone is arrested for acts of civil disobedience, and they are fighting for universal health care. They are fighting for voting rights and against voter intimidation and voter suppression. They are fighting for just redistricting against the type of gerrymandering that exists in our society today. And they are fighting for labor and worker rights. So when you look at Reverend William Barber, you see a prophetic leader Reverend William Barber in North Carolina,
North
who's
Carolina,
concerned about
know it quite
advancing
well.
Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s social and political agenda as it relates to economic justice, international peace, the idea of participatory democracy in America.
And fearless in terms of speaking out.
Yes.
That's one thing that
and
is
respecting religious diversity. We need that in this society today. And I think Bishop Barber, who's been heavily involved not only in the North Carolina NAACP, but the national NAACP, we need more leaders like that. Well, so what we're dealing with, of course, is that we have many leaders who have been co-opted by the system, who have been marginalized by the system, who have been silenced by the system. We don't have enough religious leaders who have been inspired to speak out against what's happening in our society today in terms of what is dividing people, in terms of what is turning people one against the other, in terms of the rise of bigotry and intolerance. We don't have enough religious leaders addressing those kinds of issues.
And when leaders start addressing these kinds of issues, then that is when we what? Make America great again.
Exactly. Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. talked a lot about making the American dream, about bringing the American dream to vivid life, bringing the American dream to full realization. Once we get the number of as many prophetic leaders and profiles and courage that we need, we will see America become what America has always professed to be. We are not a nation that frowns on immigrants.
Discriminates against
immigrants. Yes, we are a nation of immigrants. So I think we need to returning to America is about being America for all people. And we need leadership in order to accomplish that.
And I think that Dr. Baldwin, that's an idea that ought to be widespread, because thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Louis Baldwin, and he's talking about religious leaders. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Louis Baldwin, and he's talking about religious leadership in the age of Trumpism. And Dr. Baldwin, let's see if we can continue our discussion by having you to deal with some of the issues dealing with making America great again and some of the things that are generally associated with
that. Yes, in connection with our theme, I would say making America great again involves, as I said earlier, the development of courageous prophetic leadership and profiles in courage. Now, as I understand it today, the leadership in our country falls in a number of areas. You have those who are very supportive of Trumpism, who enable Trumpism, who are surrogates for Trumpism in the black church, like Mark Burns in South Carolina and Darrell Scott in Ohio. You also have those who are silent and complacent, and I speak in these terms to mega church pastors and super mega church pastors like T.D. Jakes and Joel Osteen and Creflo Dollar. Those leaders are not saying anything about what's going on in our society today.
They continue to preach, but they're not preaching.
Yes, but they're preaching about personal salvation. They're preaching a prosperity gospel which says that if you believe it, you can achieve it. And they are focusing primarily on material values and material ingredients. If you can believe it, God will give it to you. God will grant this to you. And then on the other hand, you have leaders who have been pretty much marginalized and co-opted by the system. So what we need today, I think, and we don't see this very much, is prophetic leadership. The kind of leadership that speaks out not only against personal evil, but matters of social evil. And I said earlier, Bishop William Barber in North Carolina, who headed the North Carolina NAACP for many years, who was an active fundraiser for the NAACP, who is now the leader of what is called Moral Mondays movement. And they meet on Mondays in North Carolina, and every Monday someone is arrested for acts of civil disobedience, and they are fighting for voting rights, fighting against voter intimidation, and fighting for universal health care, fighting for just redistricting, because as you well know, gerrymandering is a problem in American political life. So they are fighting for that. They are fighting for labor rights, for the rights of workers, and for more economic justice and more economic equality. So what you see with Bishop Barber, as opposed to those leaders who have been co-opted, or those leaders who have been silenced, is a religious leader in North Carolina who is concerned about building on the social, economic agenda of Martin Luther King Jr. And as a King scholar, and as you well know, I've written about Dr. King for almost 40 years. I judge prophetic leadership in accordance with the King standard. And I think Dr. King was the prophetic leader par excellence, the preeminent prophetic leader, because he was willing to risk life and limb to speak out against the ills of our society. Racism, poverty, economic injustice, violence, human destruction. And I think Reverend Barber is the only minister I know in the black community
I know too.
who has taken on this mantle of leadership. And so I think if we're going to get anywhere in the future, we got to develop prophetic leadership. If not, the church will lose credibility. Religion in general will lose credibility, because you cannot gain credibility by supporting the status quo, by being voices or chaplains for imperial power. You cannot gain credibility that way. Religious voices always have to be different voices, separate voices. And I think the problem in our society today is that we have not done enough in terms of what? Reading about what prophetic leadership is about, and then on the basis of that, developing strong prophetic leadership.
And so you believe that if we move in that direction again, that we will be closer toward making America great again than we are now?
It's the only way we can make America great again. Making America great again is not about white supremacy. It is not about deporting and incarcerating black and brown people. It is not about a criminal justice system or a law enforcement system that targets black and brown people. We have to get beyond that. America is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people. That's what America is about.
And anything that tends to undermine that is not making America great.
Exactly. It's going back to a most dreadful time and a dark time in our history. We are about becoming the best that we can be. And becoming the best that we can be, we realize that all human beings are made in the image of God, irrespective of race, irrespective of religion, irrespective of politics, irrespective of gender, irrespective of sexual orientation. We have to come to a realization that if we are to be the light of the world, or moral leader of the world, we have to understand what equal rights, social justice is all about.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, I think that some of the most recent events have demonstrated that America is losing some of its character.
Exactly.
Because when you look around the world, we are no longer the top in terms of doing right, faith, and other things that are part of the religious experience.
Exactly,
Would you say that?
because we've abandoned our role as global leader of the world. America first, as promoted by Trumpism, is really about America only. It's about America only. Whereas Dr. King and leaders of the past talked about America assuming global leadership in the world, that we are part of a global community. We can't get along without each other. You wake up in the morning, the coffee you drink is from West Africa. The tea is from China. The toast might be from England. The milk might be from a British farmer. So we depend on half of the world before we go to work. So how can we talk about an America only, an American first philosophy in isolation to all of the other people of the world?
And people of the world recognize what is going on with us, and other people are moving forward to assume the leadership that America once had.
Yes, global leadership.
Global leadership.
We've become a small world. Technological revolutions, scientific revolutions have made the world so small that you can travel anywhere, in a matter of hours in the world. You can talk to people in any parts of the world in a matter of minutes. We are a global family. As Dr. King said, we are a world house, a worldwide neighborhood. And leadership in this era must understand that.
Good.
If you don't understand that we are all one, that we are a global family and not separate families, then you have no role to play in 21st century leadership.
Dr. Baldwin, let me tell you how strong that is in terms of statements in reference to where we are today. Because I think that people that are talking about let's make America great again can only recognize that America has been great, but somehow instead of making America great, we are making America less than America has been.
It's about making America whole again. It's about making America whole again. That's what it's about. And when we look at it in those terms, we don't discriminate against people on the basis of religion, on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, on the basis of sexual orientation. It's about making America whole again. That's how we become great.
By being whole, America
it's
can
not
become
about looking back because there's, in many ways, a dark past.
That's right.
A dirty past. But it's about looking forward.
Good.
And that's what it's about.
And Dr. Baldwin, let me thank you for bringing that information by, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.